Hi, this is Joe Moriarty, CEO of Raven 360, and we're here again for a very special episode of the Training-Led Growth podcast. I'm joined by an amazing individual, also someone I'd call a friend, but I'm here with Richard Banfield. Hello, Richard.
Hey, Joe. What's happening?
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Power of video here. So, Richard, I'll introduce you. You've got an amazing background. I think some of the stuff you've done is incredible, and I think people will find it interesting. And we'll talk about a little bit about product and design and training-led growth. But so originally born and bred South Africa, early on trained as a biologist in university, which gives some pretty unique perspective. Part South African Defense Force, scuba diver, all the way through. When I met you, you were the founder and CEO of a leading UI and UX design company in the Boston area called Fresh Tilled Soil, where we work together. And then now as the VP of Design Transformation at Invision, which we all know Envision's an amazing design company that I think just about every Fortune 1000 company in the world uses to some extent.
That's right.
And we use it ourselves here at Raven 360. We're a happy customer.
Excellent. Glad to hear it.
So we've think about it. We've actually known each other for many years through.
Yeah, probably a decade at least.
Probably a decade at this point. So thank you for joining, and I really appreciate it. Did I miss anything? Did I miss any of the background that's important?
No, I'm sure your listeners have gone to sleep by now. They're like, "Oh, who's this guy?" So let's answer some of their questions.
Let's answer some of their questions.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So some of the questions that I get frequently, and as you know, we work with a lot of software companies. We work with a lot of high-tech companies ourselves. And we're always trying to determine how do you, number one, we use training as a method for product engagement. We use training and learning as a way for users to, if they know how to use a product really well, they typically will become a happier user. If they become a happier user, they get interested in new features and they want to buy more and they want to work with you more. So we look at it from a learning kind of and training perspective. Now, you in your world and in your life, you've designed product, you've designed it. So when you were just thinking about, product usability and design, where do you start? Where does your mind go in terms of design and people and for the customers you've worked with?
Yeah, you start with the user. You start with the job that they're trying to get done. What is it that they're trying to achieve, and how does your product help them get that done? Essentially, they're in the jobs to be done lingo. They're hiring your product to achieve some kind of work. They're saying, "Hey, I need this thing to get to my goal," and what they're really not buying is software. They're buying confidence or skill or ability or some combination of those things. And that's why they buy your software. They're trying to get a job done. So you start with that understanding, you dive deep into the discovery of that. And what you generally find out is that most of the assumptions that you walk into are wrong because you don't know what they're trying to do. You don't understand them in the same way that they understand their work. And so that kind of discovery work is the door opening for understanding. And that's where we generally start the work. There are some cases where you've got a lot of known issues, or there are existing pieces of data and research that can help you fill those gaps of understanding. So sometimes you're able to start there, but generally it's a good place to go and just ask the questions of the user. How are you using this thing? What are you trying to solve? What's the problem that needs to be addressed here? And getting your hands around that problem area is the first step. So I don't think that's any different from any other good work. That's how good scientists work. They have a hypothesis about what's potentially, the truth. And then they go and test that hypothesis. They go and build an experiment or design something to figure out if that hypothesis holds up or not. And if it validates it, great, let's go and do more. If it invalidates, then, what did you do wrong? Maybe you had the wrong assumptions. So, that's generally where my science background comes in is I walked into product and saw a lot of people making a lot of assumptions, and I said, hey, this is not how we do it in the rest of the world. Like, if you're an engineer and you're building a bridge, you don't do it like that. Or you're a doctor, you don't do it like that. Or if you're a scientist, you don't set up an experiment like that. So it just, this is a long, I mean, I'm dating myself. This is like 20 years of work ago. But, when I walked into design and product, I was like, wow, there's a huge opportunity here. And that's why we went down that road.
Yeah, no, but it's still, that insight is so interesting to me, because a lot of the companies that we work with, right, have a product. They've already built a product. And a lot of times they'll come to us and they'll say, look, we're struggling with churn. Or it's a newer tech. We work with a lot of newer technology companies growing really fast, emerging. And they're like, people aren't using everything that we want them to be using. Or we're not, we can't onboard fast enough. And I actually wonder a lot are people even testing or using any scientific method to try to figure out, are our assumptions wrong?
Yeah.
Are we solving the right problems for people with our product? So I'm actually curious about your thought on that. So when people are engineering and they're thinking about what's the next feature, what's the next release, what's the next thing that we're going to build that we think is amazing, where do you see people fail? Where do they have problems when they're going through that?
There's a really cool, do you know what Sisyphus's boat or Sisyphus's ship?
No.
You've never heard? Okay. So there's this Greek legend where Sisyphus has this ancient boat. I think, I don't remember the whole story, but it's left after his death as a kind of memorial to all the things that he created. And in order to keep this memorial in place, a group of people are assigned to maintaining this boat.
Yeah.
And what they find is that termites and just general wear and tear eventually start making this boat less usable. So they start replacing panels and planks and pieces of the boat. This is Greek ages, so this is a wooden boat.
Yeah.
And some years pass and they realize they've actually replaced just about every single part of the boat, right? And the question then remains is it the same boat?
No.
It's a really good philosophical question.
I love it.
Did they actually memorialize this boat, or did they just recreate it, in kind of essence? And I think that's what happens when a team is working on an existing product, especially enterprise, where it's got so many layers of, just stuff that's been there for probably even decades in some cases, especially if you're in the fintech world or the infrastructure world. A lot of this stuff is legacy that's built on top of legacy, that's built on top of legacy. And so you have to ask yourself, what are we actually doing here? Are we maintaining the boat? Are we continuing to build Sisyphus's memorial here? Or do we need to take it all apart and ask ourselves, is this even necessary? So there are some really big questions for enterprise level customers to answer around that. And a lot of it has to do with understanding why the original thing was created and does it still solve the problem in the era that it's currently delivering value in or not delivering value in. So, you're seeing a lot of that stuff at the enterprise level now. Big organizations saying, gee, we built this thing 20 years ago, but do we really need it? Or is it the thing that allows us to deliver value in the way that the customer expects? I was watching TV the other day and an ad for Capital One came on and they were saying, oh, this is what banks used to look like. And it's this big, old, crusty, columned, institutionalized bank. And then they cut to their cool, hip, coffee shop looking environment. And that to me is Sisyphus's boat, right? They've put a new coat of paint on it, but who the hell goes to their branch anymore? Who goes to the bank? So now they're saying, hey, we got a new boat. And you're saying, I don't need a boat.
Right.
The customer's like, well, why do you have branches with coffee shops? And then I don't need to go to the branch. Like, can you just get the mobile app to work?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of enterprises are dealing with that issue right now, which is, are we actually solving a problem that needs to be solved with the things that we think we need to have and you have a lot of bureaucracy around it, right? You can't say like, oh, there might be 10,000 engineers supporting this infrastructure. What are you going to do? You're going to throw them all out?
Right. And I got to be honest with you, I'm probably not going to my bank to go hang out and drink coffee.
No. And if you are, you and I need to have a conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
This friendship.
I have other places I can be.
Right.
So how do teams, because I think a lot of people do take a hard look at the product, if they're not getting the usage of the product or the adoption or even the logins or the value they're getting from it, they start to look at it, they start to think about like, well, maybe we need to refresh the UI. Like, that's what people, it's just like people are like, well, maybe it's not flashy enough, but that's never the answer, right?
No. And when we were running the agency, this is the kind of thing we would deal with on a daily basis. People would come in and say, we think we need a new UI. This is looking dated. And when we would go out and actually ask customers what they were looking for and whether this was something they even cared about, most of them would say, well, we don't really care about the UI. What we don't really understand is how this is relevant, or how is this solving a problem, or what their value proposition is, or how to navigate through this circus of features that, hey, I understand that all these features are here, but do I really need them? And maybe only 10% of them are useful to me as a customer. So a lot of it isn't to do with putting a new coat of paint on. A lot of it is to do with, is this even the right house? Like, do we arrive at the right address? What's going on here? Yeah. And I apologize for all the metaphors, but you know me long enough to know that that's the way I think.
I love them.
But yeah, or analogies, I should say. The idea is you don't really understand the customer well enough until you've had those kinds of conversations, and it doesn't happen in one way. For instance, you don't just go and interview the customer and then figure it out and you're done. These are very often complicated conversations. They're fraught with political problems and infrastructure problems. You can't, like we just said, you can't just throw out people because infrastructure is no longer valuable. But unfortunately, those are the hard conversations that companies need to have, and they can only get to those answers if they are willing to go and speak to their customers and find out what it is the customer wants.
Right. I was going to say, number one, those are difficult conversations just because, number one, you've got the people who have invested, probably built it originally, probably thought it was, it's the greatest thing. So it's a hard conversation in general to try to say, hey guys, maybe, you have to rethink everything here. Like, is this even the right product that we're talking about?
Right. It's funny. My title is design transformation, but really what it should be is enterprise therapy.
Yeah.
Because most of the conversations that we're having with our Fortune 1000 customers are people problems. They're figuring out how you get the folks that are inside the organization that have been employed and promised a job to do a certain kind of thing, now being asked to do something else because the market's changed or the customer's needs changed or the value proposition's changed. Yep. And it's managing all of those conversations. Those conversations are obviously going to be difficult. If you were hired as a infrastructure engineer and now we're saying, I'm sorry, we're pushing everything to the cloud and we don't need you anymore, those are difficult conversations. Or if you were hired as a salesperson and the company says, we're going to be product led now and everything's going to be online and there is no sales requirement, right, you've got to just, figure out your job on your own. And because we're just doing everything online. So these are very, very complicated conversations, especially at scale, right? It's different if you're a startup and you've got 5 people in your mom's basement, but when you're dealing with the kind of organizations that I work with every single day, we're dealing with tens of thousands of engineers, hundreds of thousands of employees.
Yes.
These ships don't turn overnight. They have to be orchestrated in a very clever way. And that's why I find transformation such an interesting thing at the enterprise level.
Yeah.
Because at scale, these problems don't look like the conversations you see in the startup world. They don't look like the conversations you engage with on Twitter. Right? Twitter, everybody's got one answer for every problem, right? It's like you pose a problem and some guy says, well, you should just be agile. You should just do this, or you should use this methodology or this tool. And in enterprise, that's never the case. There's never one process. There's never one methodology. There's never one conversation. There's just a dozen things to consider. Around every corner, there's another dozen things, and there's all the consequences. Like you change one thing, and there are this cascading effect of consequences that happen further and further down the line. So enterprise is a big, complicated problem, and I really like that. The more complicated, the better.
Yeah, it's so funny you said transformation in the enterprise, and I just was reading something yesterday in an article, and it said if you see disruption or transformation regarding enterprise, be scared. Get a little wary here, because number one, there's going to be all that stuff that you just talked about, which is bias and people's history and all of the work they've put in, and not only that, but emotion, right? So people just so emotion driven. And so like that in and of itself, like the work that you're doing is just starting there is going to be difficult, because you kind of got to wade through all of those levels of human stuff that people are, engaged with. But so do you get that pushback? So when you go to a huge company, like you're working now with massive companies.
Yeah.
You go to one of those and say, all right, look, we're going to talk about digital transformation and design transformation. Where do you start? Like, how do you disarm somebody so they're not like, oh my gosh, I'm going to throw everything away and Richard's going to, how does that happen?
Well, first of all, we're invited in. We're not going to sell design transformation. I have no, my job is great because Invision's a SaaS company, and my job is completely separate from the product itself. My job is to make our customers successful. And so what that means is they're calling us, inviting us in to say, hey, we've already started on a transformation journey. What can we do to make it better and easier and faster? And like you said, a lot of that has to do with people and emotions. So the tooling, the programs, the practices that we are creating and distributing across our team so that they can be available to our customers are very often tools for conversation. Now, this might sound ineffective because what most people are thinking is, oh, you need some big consulting firm to come and install some big ERP level software to make everything work and transform. And the reality is, yeah, sure, maybe you need that stuff, but honestly, you probably need more purposeful conversations. And you need to be good at conversations, and you need a way to have good conversations that are objective. So, for example, one of the things that we're
teaching people, you're not saying, hold on, we're not going to do design transformation. We're going to do, this is how we should communicate.
We're going to talk. Yeah. And so, what we'll do is we have this thing called the maturity assessment. And what we do is we just assess the teams and look at where they are, how ready are they for this kind of work that they're about to do, and then talk to them about it. They are talking to themselves about it, but we're facilitating that conversation. And I can tell you, crazy good conversations. Like you're sitting in a room and you've got 20 product leaders there, and within 20 minutes, somebody is having a massive breakthrough. They're like, oh, I get it now. Or this is the real problem that we need to face, and then going to be able, like, actionable stuff that they're able to go and do the next day. And none of it is installing some ERP software or hiring McKinsey. It's just about figuring out the best way to have a conversation. Right. A lot of, hard conversations, but how do you have the right conversation at the right time so that you can get the right people in the right places? And I'm a fan of people like Jim Collins, who talk about putting the right people in the seats and the wrong people off the seat so that you can actually get where you want to go. That is really the core of this. It's, who's doing the work? Are they working with the right people? Are they having the right conversations? And I think that the more I get into this and the more I see it and the more evidence I see related to this, the more it speaks to the fact that the real work that's going to be done in the future is going to be about managing people-to-people interactions, dealing with the fact that it's incredibly hard for teams to work with each other. Like right now is the least complex the world will ever be. You try that on for size and you're like, whoa, today is an easy day? What the hell? I just had like the hardest day of my life.
Yeah.
Tomorrow is going to be worse. And dealing with all those complexities makes it very difficult for people to work with each other. So yeah, let's give all the mundane tasks to AI, because we're going to need all our brain power and our socializing power to be able to have these conversations so that we can elevate these organizations and this value to the next level. Like we're going to need all the human capabilities that we can master.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to AI doing the mundane stuff.
Yeah. Well, it is so funny. I mean, it always boils down to, or many times it boils down to just the human interaction with each other, like the human conversation. And what I've learned over the last, number of years too, is that everyone's dealing with their own stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's like, let's just take work off the table, but everyone is dealing with their own issues at home, with their spouse, with their kids, with their elder parents, everyone's got this stuff that's like going on in their head. And then you kind of come into the enterprise where you need to provide for this family. You need to provide for yourself. You've got this big stuff you have to do. And it's like, you almost have to find a way to connect with people or get other people to connect with each other. So then you can just say, look, we're going to transform, and we're going to use design, and we're going to do this amazing stuff. But we kind of have to let a lot of that stuff, you got to find a way. You got to find the way through. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, is that,
right.
But part of that, getting people in the right seat and the right bus, is like timing as well. Like, or a good friend of ours and prior podcast guest, Ashley Welch, Somersault Innovation, amazing design thinker, and she relates it to sales. But she said to me the other day something that was really important. She said, if you're going to have really important conversations and hard conversations and make progress, a lot of it has to do with set and setting.
Yes.
So mindset.
Mm-hmm.
What is the mindset of the group in which we're trying to make progress with? And then also just, what's the setting?
Mm-hmm.
Are we in a
safe psychological place?
A safe psychological place? Are we walking through a forest? Are we sitting and we're overlooking the ocean? Are we in some place that can be inspirational, or some place that can be like, you automatically have a more open mind?
Yeah.
As opposed to sitting in maybe a boardroom or a conference room that's kind of gray and carpeted and fluorescent light. And I said, wow, I was like, that's amazing. And I started thinking about that for our own team. I said, well, if we want to do transformational thinking and open-mindedness, and I think a lot of that has to do with setting. And because if the setting's first, and then maybe the mindset of people will be less.
It's all connected.
It's all
connected. Yeah. And the important thing here is understanding that as human beings, for instance, like you said, you've got a life, you've got all these other components to your world. You've got a set that's different from my set. Yep. My mindset is different because I grew up differently. I experienced different things. Apartheid South Africa was a very interesting and mind-boggling place to grow up in. And certainly kind of created a mindset for me. And I need to remember that. I need to understand that everybody I bring into a room brings a background and their diversity and cultural differences and their mindsets to that conversation.
Yeah.
So I find that, like in transformation, we're about to do a big project with our team at Invision, and we're going to be working with the entire customer-facing group. That's all our salespeople and customer support, customer success people, and all of our marketing people. So that's hundreds of people.
Yep.
And almost all the work we're doing with them is about mindset.
Yeah.
And somebody might say, well, hang on a second, like you're getting everybody to fly down to a location and you're going to get them all in the room together and you're going to have a conversation and you're going to talk about mindset. How does that achieve my goals? Well, let me tell you, because you're an athlete, you go and work with any top athlete and I can show you an athlete that has got the best genes in the world, but the wrong mindset. They're not going anywhere.
Nope.
And I can show you somebody who's got very mediocre genes and great mindset, and they might be the next world champion. So really, this is a game of psychology and biology. You know, it's all about understanding humans, understanding how they fit into the environment. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be a biologist or to have training as a biologist, is because I always think about these organisms inside of their environments and how they're interacting with each other and what that means to them. Like, you know, what does this network ultimately look like of interactions?
Yeah.
And I never really thought about that as useful until it started helping. It started addressing issues and started solving problems.
Isn't that wild that, you know, we are talking about product, right? And design and how to do all this, this stuff. And it always comes back to the human nature, to the psychology that people need to have. But it's so interesting. And by the way, before I forget, speaking of South Africa with you, I finished a book called Barbarian Days, by William Finnegan. Have you read it?
Yes.
Great book, but also talks specifically about South Africa and the surfing and apartheid and how anybody who's listening, great book. I really enjoyed that book. And it was a kind of an epic journey of the human mind. You know, I mean, this transformation that this one guy went through travel and through surfing. And I took a lot from it. So I thought that was an interesting one. So let me ask you this, coming back to product just a little bit. So can we talk about Invision as the product? You do the digital, I'm sorry, I keep saying digital, it's design. You do the design transformation. And as you've said, it's thinking, it's human communication, it's people, but it's also, what I heard is also being data driven. It's also trying to
100%,
get feedback from people and feedback from the market and saying like, are we solving the right problem?
Yeah. You know, I think the thing about data in its modern era or modern form is that we only think of big data now. For some reason, we have just forgotten that everything is data.
Right.
Like a conversation is data.
Yeah.
You know, if I look at my win notes in Salesforce, for example, that's sentiment essentially, but it's data.
Right.
And I can go through there and I can see that some program that we were engaged in, some practice that we were engaged in, led to conversations that led to a $4 million lift in ARR. Right? So that's data. There were conversations that led to other things that led to ARR. Like, these are real things. I mean, we have to understand that data comes in lots of different formats. It's not just some spreadsheet with a bunch of crap in it that nobody can understand except data scientists.
Yes.
And I think that's really the key thing here, is not getting stuck in this idea that product is technology or product is data, or, you know, it's this almost engineering only space, but rather product is a platform for success or platform for achievement, depending on what that job to be done is. And so we've taken a very deliberate point of view on this. We have a SaaS product, very, very good for large, complicated organizations because it's connected workflow, right? So it's built for designers, but it's more built for the people that they collaborate with, the engineers, the developers, the product people, the copywriters. That collaborative circle or cross-functional circle.
And I might add, you make it easy.
That's what we do. Now,
it really does.
We've gone deep on that and that collaborative story, and we support that with customer success and the services that my team offer, because we know that that's a big deal for big companies.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our competitors have gone down another road. They've chosen to say, look, we want to focus just on the UI, or we just want to focus on the code aspect of this. And they've solved a functional area, and that's great. They can go down that road and they can do that. But that doesn't help our customers. Our customers are big and complicated and have lots of people involved. And so they need to manage all that stuff. And so, again, this is about understanding what your customer needs from you, right? If we try to be everything to everybody, we would then end up have a whole bunch of things and a whole bunch of features that are not really solving the big person's problem or the big company's problem or the small company's problem. Neither gets what they want. So we really have to understand who our customer is and then build something that lines up with that value. And that might seem obvious, but show me a company that's doing that really well, and I'll show you a great company, because nobody thinks that doing less is more. And yet that is the answer. You do more for the fewer people that you want to be your customers and do less for everybody else, and good things will happen.
Right.
But when you try and solve all of the problems for all of the various companies and people out there, you end up with nothing. You're just this paper-thin organization that doesn't deliver value at all.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing thought on that. And so, we think about, and I think I've talked to you about this, is that we think about a North Star metric, and you helped me with this. Mm-hmm. But we think about
love this,
ourselves all the time, something that applies that we can look at as a product, because we're a product company, ourselves, and then something that would apply that we can look at to our customer base, and what do they, and for us as Raven 360, we align around experts. We align around how many experts have we been able to create in a given product, our own product. And then, we're a learning platform to help other customers learn how to use product. So we look at how many experts do we create in Raven 360, but then that translates to how many experts do our customers create. And that then leads to ARR. It also leads to reduced churn, things like that.
Yeah.
With Invision, how do you guys think about that? I mean, does that resonate?
Almost the same way. So I've got two sets of customers. My first set of customer is internal. So my 200 and something sales and customer success people and my marketing people, hundreds of people in my organization that I have to service. I have to make them really good at their jobs. And the only way that I can make them good at their jobs is to give them the ability to have great, purposeful conversations. Mm-hmm. So I need to give them all the relevant market training. I've got to give them the relevant company-specific challenges training. So outside of us, there's a market. Outside of us, there are companies. What's happening in those companies? How do they think about that stuff? How do they need to get smarter about that? Mm-hmm. And then training them on conversation. Like, how do you have a good conversation?
Yeah.
Once I've trained those people then go on to work with our customers to train their customers how to do the same thing.
Yep.
So very similarly to you, my North Star metric is we train the trainers.
Yep.
Now, we're not looking to make necessarily experts out of these people, but we're looking to make them the best purposeful conversationalists out there.
Yeah.
So when it comes to design, when it comes to complicated cross-functional teams in these large organizations doing product design, can they have a conversation about that? Can they talk to the problems? Can they ask the right questions? Can they do discovery in the right way? Training the trainer is my goal, and that's my metric.
Right. I find listening, actually active listening, is a skill, and I talked about this at a previous podcast too, but listening and listening to understand as opposed to listening to respond, is something that I had to work on.
Yep.
I think that's a skill that if you're having a conversation is like super important. I'm sure you guys think about that because,
Yeah, and I believe that listening is actually not the foundational skill. I know this is counterintuitive to a lot of people, but in the same way that trust isn't the thing you try and create, right? Trust is the outcome of all the other things you create. So for instance, reliability is the path to trust. If I say I'm going to do something and then I do it, trust is developed, right? That's reliability developing towards trust. If I say, hey, Joe, trust me, your first instinct might be, I hear that from a lot of politicians. Probably not going to start off with trust.
Yeah.
It might be like cautiously trusting, but you won't be fully trusting until I actually show you that I'm reliable. In the same way, listening isn't the skill that you want to start with. What you want to start with is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
If you can truly understand what we were talking about earlier, the set and setting. What's the mindset of this person? Why are they talking about this thing now? What's their driving motivations, their purpose? Where do they come from? What is their background? How do they see the world? How do they kind of organize the world in their mind? And why this particular emotion in this particular conversation? Organizing that stuff and understanding it makes you a good listener. So starting with empathy almost results in good listening.
Yes.
Whereas starting with listening is almost like, I just wish they would shut up so that I can start telling them how well I listened.
I can talk, right?
I listened to you. Now I'm going to repeat it back to you. Like that kind of active listening where it's like, oh, I heard what you said and I'm going to say it back to you. That's fine, but it's also condescending because it doesn't really mean you truly took the work inside you to understand that person.
Look, empathy is, I think it's an amazing thing if you can do it as a person, because if you can truly understand someone, not even agree. A lot of times you don't even agree with a
no.
But I think sometimes there's a lot of empathy that's lacking, in this world in general. But if you can listen to just understand someone's point of view, understand their perspective, understand, and by the way, you're probably going to learn something about their background,
that's
and
right,
where their mindset is just by trying to understand it. So I love that. I appreciate that in empathy. I don't think we talk about that enough. I don't think that in business, and I talk about it in our family, we talk about it. I try to teach empathy to my kids, and I don't know if they're there yet, but we'll. Yeah.
We'll know soon enough.
Podcast that we'll talk about. Yeah. So, well, listen, Richard, I really appreciate your time, and this has been an amazing conversation. I learned a ton, and one thing I didn't mention: you're an author. You've also written a book. Tell me about your book. Tell everyone, all these listeners, about your book.
I'm going to be very immodest and tell you that I've written 4 books. Design Sprint was the first, followed by Design Leadership, and then Product Leadership, and then more recently Enterprise Design Sprint. And those first 3 are available through Amazon. It's an O'Reilly publication, and the last book is available on the Invision website, so you can download that directly.
And where does everyone find all of your thinking and your writing?
So I have a website, richardbanfield.com, and you can follow me on Twitter, rmbanfield. And that's where I get into conversations with folks and talk product, talk design, talk people. richardbanfield.com, rmbanfield on Twitter. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Richard. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Thanks, Joe. I
always do. So I hope to talk to you soon, my friend, and best of luck. Talk to you soon.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Joe.
Cheers. Bye-bye.